You're listening to the Tech for Business Leaders podcast, brought to you by Mazars. This is the podcast where we take technology topics and discuss how business leaders can tackle them. I'm your host, Izan Khan, a privacy specialist at the technology and digital team at Mazars. And throughout this series, we'll be speaking to industry guests, specialist speakers, and subject matter experts about how businesses are taking the latest tech challenges and developments whilst ensuring that they're protected from a risk, security, and compliance perspective. At Mazars, we believe that technology can help businesses, large or small, advance operations, improve productivity, and grow. And so we look forward to sharing knowledge, insights, and practical tips about how businesses can utilize technology to gain a competitive advantage. Now, on with this week's show.
Hello, and welcome to the next episode of the Tech for Leaders podcast with Mazars. For those of you who are new to our podcast, welcome. And to our returning listeners, welcome also. I'm Yemi Olutola, and I'm your guest host this week, where we'll be exploring and providing guidance on how to protect your organization's assets against cyber threats. The world seems to be moving at such a fast pace, with technology and information technology abounding, and with it come the different changes. Organizations have also been forced into new terrain brought about by unexpected developments such as the pandemic, an increase in state-sponsored attacks as just some examples. To discuss this topic, I'm happy to be joined today by the Area Vice President of the Technical Account Management for the EMEA regions at Tanium, Chris Vaughan. So Chris, welcome.
Hi, Yemi. Thanks for having me today. I'm really excited to be talking to you about cyber threats we're facing today.
Thank you. For those of you who are not familiar with Tanium, they are a cybersecurity company with offices in North America, in Asia, and Europe. And they are currently the only ones in the industry who offer converged endpoint management via a single platform to give full visibility and integrate IT, governance, risk, security, and compliance. We have joined forces with Tanium to provide additional benefits to our clients by leveraging Tanium's powerful discovery, remediation, and reporting tools. So Chris, once again, welcome. Thank you for joining us. If we could start with you explaining your experience with technology and your link to today's topic, please.
Yeah, my experience with technology, it goes back in my university days. I used to work in high performance computing, and I like telling this story because I think it's very relevant to the topic at hand today. When I was in university, we used to call our servers, and I worked in a high performance computing lab after Lords of the Rings characters, Star Wars moons, these type of things. And reason you could do that is because you didn't have that many. And we had the directory server over there. It was called Gandalf because he was all-knowing. We had file server. That was a Death Star. It always seemed to be blowing up. So that's kind of where I got my start in IT and high performance computing. And since then, the world's really changed. Things like mobile phones, mobile computing have really taken off in that time period. And I feel really fortunate to be part of the ride. But in my role at Tanium today, I work with some of the largest organizations on the planet. We support, I think it's over 50% of the Fortune 100 customers out there.
Okay.
We're deployed on 8 of the 10 top banks in the world. Close to home, we work with customers like Barclays Bank, AstraZeneca. And in my role, I'm talking to them about how they can secure and manage their endpoints at scale and at speed. And it's fascinating. And I really enjoy the topic that we're talking about today because, that's why I got into IT in the first place.
Great. Thanks for sharing that with us. It's interesting to see or to hear how, things have kind of developed or evolved from your university days to where we are. I mean, all these names that you would give these assets. And then, obviously things have developed since then. So thanks for sharing that with us. Chris, could we start perhaps by exploring what we mean to our listeners, exploring what we mean by assets, at least in the context of today's conversation?
Yeah. So assets, in the context of today's conversation, it's well, let's talk about assets just broadly speaking first, and then we'll get into specifics. But when we talk about assets from an IT standpoint and a cybersecurity standpoint, it's really anything that's connected over the internet. Anything that has an IP address. So that could be your smartphone, your smartwatch. It could be an IP camera. It could be your dog feeder in your house, or your remote control robot that sweeps and vacuums the floor. But in the context of today, really what we're talking about is computing devices such as laptops, servers, desktops, and then also whether it's either hosted on premise in your own data centers or hosted on the cloud. Because remember, cloud computing is just somebody else's computer that you're using somewhere else. So you still have to manage it. You still have to secure it. And then we can also talk about, other paradigms such as virtualization and containers as well.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. Right. So thank you. Now we have a better understanding, at least, of assets in the context of today's conversation. One of the things that I have found is that cybersecurity can sometimes seem quite complicated, and also for organizations or perhaps business leaders, it can sometimes seem a daunting task to undertake in terms of what needs to be done to secure assets. And yet we have cybersecurity becoming this, topical area. It's, one of the top, key topics right now. And also you have it topping many board agendas, and rightly so. Yet you find that there's an increase. You have an increase in terms of cyber threats and cyber attacks at the moment. Why do you think it is that it's difficult for organizations to secure their assets effectively against cyber threats?
Yeah, I think it's ever evolving, and I talked about how computing's really changed in the last 20, 30 years I've been in the industry for. And no time greater than now. The pandemic has really forced us to transform our organizations, and there's great memes going around on LinkedIn and Facebook, and it was who pushed forward your transition to cloud or digital transformation initiatives, and it was COVID-19 at the bottom, and somebody saying there it wasn't your IT architect, it wasn't the CIO. Ultimately, it was them that put in the plan, but a lot of these plans were over 10 years, and they get condensed right down into 2 years. During that time, we saw that there was a big shift from on-premise to off-premise. And typically, most organizations had built their security infrastructure with the idea that at any one point in time, they would only see about 15% of their staff working remotely. A lot of them had fixed desktops, fixed laptops. The devices didn't really leave the perimeter.
Yes.
And they invested heavily in things like intrusion protection systems. And you can think about it as, a big castle. And we were talking to a gentleman on the way in about how he goes to Warwick Castle. And, Warwick Castle, I haven't been there, but it described, it's got moat there. It's got, big walls there. And, with Warwick Castle, you used to be able to see everybody walking in and out. When you start moving people off premise, that security, it disappears there. And that's what we've been seeing across organizations for about 10 years now, as the perimeter is starting to dissolve. When COVID struck, I had one customer, they moved something like 60, 70% of their endpoints offline, as in work from home overnight. And that creates new security problems there.
Indeed.
Suddenly those devices, they couldn't scan for things like vulnerabilities, check to see if they're patched. They didn't know, who was using what device for what. And a lot of times they were forced to use their own laptops at home because the company they worked for weren't able to keep their business continuity plan, because they'd never thought that, suddenly, we need thousands of laptops for people to work from home. And A lot of the traditional kind of security checks and things like that have been skipped. And I remember being on a Zoom not long ago, and one of the attendees on there came up as Little Princess 123, and I said to the individual, I was like, "Who's Little Princess? Is that your nickname?" He's like, "No." He's like, "My daughter's been using my work laptop for school because they had to do that during the pandemic."
Yes.
And so that's really changed things. That shift there. And then it's also the different paradigms in computing. So, cloud computing is still quite new for a lot of organizations. People will quickly move into the cloud, but then they forget that they have to secure it and manage it as well. And a lot of the tooling they have is built for that on-premise world. It's not built for remote clouds. It's not built for remote employees. So it's become a real difficult challenge. And then also our adversaries, they're getting better. If you in the market, they've got marketplaces, so you can pay for credentials, you can pay for access, you can pay for malware, and kind of mix and match. So there's really been a rapid boom there, and it's gotten easier for the adversaries, but it's also gotten easier for us to work from home. So there's a lot of benefits there too.
So, Chris, one of the things that I've found with cybersecurity, we have so many things that are going on. So, according to the NCSC, that's the National Cybersecurity Center, for example, you have, well, at least in 2021, there was a record level of online scams, nearly 4 times higher than in the previous year, apparently. Then you have, this ever-evolving cyber threat landscape where, there's just different things going on. There's this propensity for the unexpected to happen. With the NCSC, again, they've mentioned they issued a heightened cyber threat alert earlier in the year on account of the war between Russia and Ukraine. Then you have these notable developments, which you've also alluded to. So you have things like cloud services. You've mentioned that. You have the pandemic. You've spoken about the impacts that the pandemic has had. But in this context, you have the workforce who are now more than ever using their own devices, bringing those to work. Who would have thought that a few years back? And then you have supply chain related issues, or you have third party related matters. Looking at all of these notable developments, it doesn't seem as if it is that technology and information technology are quite dynamic in nature. So the question then is, how can organizations maintain a handle on what is this clearly ever moving train?
Yeah. It's tough, isn't it? There's a lot of things going on at once, and then not only work pressures but home pressures too, and working from home and these things too. I think organizations, there's lots of ways you can get a handle on this. What we find with our customers and what I talk to them a lot about is just getting the basics right. So things like understanding how many assets you have, understanding what state they're in, understanding what data it is you're trying to protect. And if you can do those things, good patching, good asset management, then it makes a lot of problems just disappear overnight. And it's amazing how these simple things can do. I think also too is, the best defense is a great offense. Start getting prepared for these situations here. Practice your incident response plan, practice your data recovery plan. Make sure that these processes are working and that you can execute on them. In terms of the adversary, they're always going to be innovating and changing things. You really, organizations need to adopt a really secure first type culture and be thinking about security all the time and every time. A few months ago, I got hooked on one of those phishing tests from the company, and I was wearing a badge of shame around the office for a couple of days, and they were really stealthy. I think I'd just booked my holiday for the summer, and then it said your holidays are being cancelled. Click here to find out more, and I'm like, what?
You clicked away.
Clicked it, but luckily that was a simulation. And since then, I've been a lot more security minded. So it's keeping that kind of security culture and keeping everybody thinking about security is a great way to just, take a step up there. So, to me, that's kind of, how you can keep up with the ever expanding train there. And if, you find yourself stuck, there's lots of resources available. You mentioned the NCSE earlier on. I love their guides on the website because it's written for not only, the big enterprises that, we talk to on a daily basis, but it's written for, mom and dad as well on how to shop online securely. So it's really easy to consume. Then, for enterprises, if you need more help, there's many managed service providers out there. There's organizations such as Mazars that can help too. So, reach out and get help there. You don't need to be developing your own security practice if you can't do it. There's plenty of other companies that specialize in this day to day.
Indeed. So, there's this saying that you are as strong as your weakest link. And what we have found, or what we do find is threat actors in their different guises trying to seek out an organization's, the weakest links within organizations. To that extent, what would you say are perhaps the emerging issues in cybersecurity or the cyber threat landscape, which perhaps leaders or business leaders ought to be mindful of in terms of weaknesses and vulnerabilities that are kind of emerging?
Yeah, it's always comes back to the human element in it. We are the weakest link, and sometimes it's not necessarily cyber. It's made a mistake, tried to make a code change or config change. In the middle of the night there, and suddenly you've misspelt the server name and it's gone down. But in the context of the cyber security, two of the biggest ways of compromising, the biggest way of compromising an organization is still through phishing. Yes. So, you need to protect that front line there. But, from there, it's the biggest one is business email compromise. So they get access to your email accounts. They look at the billing organization and then they impersonate either a customer or they change the digits on the bank account number or sort code, and suddenly that money you thought you were paying to your vendor is actually going into the cyber crimes bank somewhere. So, that is one of the big things. And then when you look at, endpoints in the further organization, it comes down to ransomware. It's, they get access to that initial endpoint by somebody clicking on a lure. And when I mention lures is something that will get you to click on something. So, for me, when I failed that phishing thing, it was, they timed it and said your PTO had been denied. But the cyber criminals, they're starting to use a lot of themes that are in the news. So during the pandemic, we saw a lot of vaccine type lures there. We're apparently moving towards a recession. Money's going to get tight. You might see a bit more lures there. Might be some get rich quick schemes there. So, in terms of that, the adversary will compromise through phishing endpoint, and then they'll move into the organization and detonate ransomware, and then they'll demand Bitcoin from you there. So, weakest link, it's always end user. Followed by that, it's your perimeter. It's exposed servers on the web, and there's remote login devices that are exposed there. Reminds me of Colonial Pipeline. I think that was last year or the year before. And for listeners, Colonial Pipeline, they were compromised through a remote access server. They've been able to VPN into the organization. That was password protected, but they didn't have two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. And they ended up taking out the East Coast oil pipeline for a number of days there. It caused panic buying. It caused shortages on fuels. And it took on fuel, petrol, diesel. They call it gasoline over in America. but it took them numerous days to recover. They did pay the ransom, 4.4 million, but they didn't get their assets back as quick as possible.
Yes.
So, look at those exposed endpoints there and just put in simple things like multi-factor authentication. Most of the VPN providers out there, remote desktop providers, have this as a capability. But be investing in a lot of these simple things and understanding where your perimeter is, and comes back to knowing where your assets are.
Yes. Another thing that comes to mind. You just mentioned the recession, this impending recession, and a lot of organizations, a lot of business leaders currently have so many other competing interests that sometimes I guess it might be a bit of an uphill task to decide or determine, which ones should be priority and which ones shouldn't. Why do you think this topic is, one that should be deemed priority by organizations in the present climate that, the present times that we were living in?
Yeah, it certainly should be very, very top of the list there. If you go back 5 to 10 years ago, it's quite amusing that the things that could take out of business, it wasn't a pandemic. First of all, that was very low on it.
Indeed.
Cybercrime there, cyber it was on the list, but really low down. Today, that's number one on the list, or close to it. Reason why it's so high is that we had some devastating cyber attacks around 2015, 2017. Yeah, 2017. Got my dates wrong, but WannaCry and NotPetya, and they completely incapacitated some of the biggest organizations in the world. One of the big ones was Merck Shipping Company, brought them down to a standstill for multiple days. In the UK, TNT really suffered from it. Yes. And most importantly, the NHS itself got hit by it. But, cyber attacks can literally stop business in its tracks and halt it. And the knock-on effects that are immense. And it's even to a point where it can cause physical injuries in the real world. I was looking online this past week, and there was a Iranian steel mill. They had a cyber attack there, and they were able to explode the steel mill. And then also a devastating article I saw in the Wall Street Journal a few months ago, and they attributed loss of life to a ransomware attack on the hospital, and said, if the ransomware hadn't hit that hospital, it wouldn't have resulted in loss of life. So it has real measurable consequences in the physical world, unfortunately. And it's all from the stroke of a keyboard.
Yeah. So the effects are far-reaching, essentially. If you're hit as an organization. So, Chris, what would you say then in terms of, or irrespective of an organization's size, what would you say should be just some basic steps, perhaps, that organizations should be, taking to improve their cyber hygiene?
Yeah. So first off, it's understanding what you've got, how many endpoints you have out there, physical, virtual, remote, connected. Truly understand that, because if you don't understand what you've got, then how can you secure it? So first, asset management, discovery. Second step on that is understand what state they're in. So, are they patched? Are they compliant? Which means if they're patched, if they're compliant, they're genuinely as secure as they can be out of the box.
What does the patching do for?
Patching, it fixes common vulnerabilities on an endpoint there that hackers could take advantage of. So a vulnerability you can think of, it's like a skeleton key. If a hacker knows that vulnerability exists, he can pull out his skeleton key, unlock that endpoint, and gain access to that endpoint. Patching removes the skeleton key access on that endpoint, and only ways of getting onto that endpoint. So, do that. Next off, once it's nice and safe and secure, and there's no particular order in here. I kind of it might understanding where your data is can also help drive the priority of your patching, but that would be second or third for me.
Okay.
Understanding where your critical data is in your environment, and then start cleaning that up. I mentioned lots of people were bringing devices home. People were using their own devices for work purposes, and a lot of that data is on devices where you wouldn't expect it. So make sure you're cleaning that data up, getting it back into the places where it should be. And then once you've got that data in place, it's about understanding the controls and access to get to that data. We talked about Warwick Castle there. We've got Tower of London not far from us there. The Queen's Jewels is always kind of right in the middle of the Tower of London, because they know that's the most important thing, and they make as many steps and as hard to get to that as possible. So treat your IT environment like that as well, and your secrets like that. So, and then also, make sure that you're doing things like putting in multi-factor authentication.
Okay.
I would also recommend looking at a zero trust architecture, so that if your device is on premise or off premise, it's as secure in either setting there. That way, that you've got, latest antivirus install, latest patching.
Okay.
You're managing that endpoint offline, whether it's online as well.
Okay. So you've mentioned a few steps that organizations or business leaders should be taking to improve their cyber hygiene. Who would you say then are the key stakeholders in this respect? Who are the people that need to be able to move this forward? What role should they be playing to make their efforts count effectively?
Yeah. Ultimately, the first person's the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer,
Okay.
and that person's job is securing the organization from cyber threats. But more importantly, to get a good CISO in place, you need to have support from the CEO, the CFO, and then also I think legal needs to be considered as well, because legal will be able to help measure the risk and liability if you don't have these safeguards in place. So, what are the fines for, say, a data breach such as GDPR? British Airways get hit with that not long ago when they leaked some customer. Well, they didn't leak; they got compromised, and there was big fines there, multiple millions. GDPR by default, I think, is 4% of their gross annual profit, which is a
Yes.
large amount of
Yes.
money for an
Yes.
organization. So, need to invest in it. And then once you've got a good security program in place, a good structure, that relationship between the CISO and head of IT operations or CIO needs to be really strong as well, because a lot of these controls that I talked about, being able to patch endpoints, being able to check them for vulnerabilities, the tooling will typically reside in the IT operations team, and they need to be empowered to be able to patch things and make sure that we've got a clean bill of health. But when I talk to C-level individuals, the first thing I talk to them is about really is making sure you've got a good security culture, and then that you have security at the forefront of your mind, that you're doing regular tests there, you're investing in it, and then also making sure that you're adapting and being ready for the future.
Okay. So we've spoken about the different approaches or measures, should I say, which business leaders could take to safeguard their assets. From your own experience, would you say that any organizations come to mind who have embraced some of these measures and, as such or as a result of, embracing those measures, have seen favorable outcomes? Are there any organizations that perhaps you could share with us from your own experience, that is?
Yeah, I can't name specific organizations, but we work with a lot of the large financial institutes, and their job is securing our money. A lot of that moves digitally today, and I feel like they're doing a really good job there. They're investing in it, and my money is consistently arrives in my bank account, and when I haven't been victim of fraud. Knock on wood there, but I don't want the feedback and the mic. But it's they seem to be doing it well. And they're probably the most crucial. Well, there's many crucial organizations out there, but
Yes.
if your money disappeared, you would be up in arms. You wouldn't trust banks anymore to look after it. So I think they do a good job. I mean, a lot of organizations do a good job. The theme that I typically see in organizations do a good job is they've really internalized this security first culture that I mentioned. They are investing in the organization. They are iterating and adapting their security programs to make sure that they're ready for future threats and that they're responding to current threats. But it's organizations that are thinking that they're going to get compromised, and they're trying to do something about it constantly, and trying to stop the adversary, the ones that are best suited. The ones that typically get compromised is they're not thinking that they'll get attacked. They think they're immune, and I don't think there's many organizations out there that are immune from attacks these days.
No, unfortunately. In terms of where an organization has embraced some of these things that you've suggested, if they were to just fully embrace them, what realistically can they expect to see? Does that mean once they have embraced these measures, would you say that they can realistically then just rest on their laurels and expect that things will continue to be secure, that their assets will continue to be secure?
Great question. No is a quick and easy answer. The adversaries, they're always innovating and adapting their business models, for any changes. If you look back, 5-10 years ago, a lot of where hackers spent their time was trying to get credit card numbers and personal identifiable information, because they could use that to get access to money.
Yes.
That's changed in the last few years to ransomware, and a lot of what's driving that is new ways to get paid, and especially Bitcoin. In this example, it's a lot harder to trace Bitcoin transactions than it is actual real world physical money transactions. So we've seen a big switch to ransomware. And with that, the targeting has switched. So they used to target mostly financial institutions to try and get these credit card numbers, or any company that would take a credit card there, because usually they had records of credit cards. And with ransomware, it's everybody's a target now. And they're going after horrible places like schools. Who would want to hospitals? Who would want to ransomware a hospital? Really, really sick individuals targeting that. And that's, at the most, it needs people there. But, they've adapted their model, because those organizations will pay out to unransom. And, insurance industry helps with that as well, to recover. So, they've adapted their model, and so should organizations adapt their model to fight it. There's a lot of innovation going on in the software market to help fix these problems. There's a lot of good information out there. We mentioned NCSC earlier. For those that might be listening from the US, CISA's got some great actionable information as well too. But I feel like, we know more about the threat today than we ever have, and we know more on how we should be securing and managing endpoints.
So the key message really is we have to keep at it. It's not something that you just do and then you sit back. But I guess hopefully, if you have the right measures in place, at least you can say that you can effectively safeguard your assets to a great extent, and then just keep at it, essentially.
Yeah, and I don't know if you watch TV at all. There's this TV show on at the moment called The Undeclared War, which talks about a cyber attack there. And part of the things you're seeing on the TV in this fake cyber attack is deep fakes, where they're impersonating people like the prime minister on TV. and they're rebroadcasting that on the news, and people are thinking that's the prime minister that's actually saying these things. But the technology is really adapting. It's a bit easier to fool people. You can impersonate people's voices if you've got
Yes,
enough
apparently.
recordings there. AI is really going to fuel that in the future as well. There's a lot of chatbots out there that people talk to and they think they're real human.
Yes.
I saw a news article recently, and it was a Google researcher saying that Google's AI is sentient now, and it's only a matter of time, trying to scare people. But the applications of these changes in the way we use technology
Yes.
are really going to manifest itself in the cyber world as well.
Right, so we've covered quite a lot of ground today. We've talked about the fact that cyber threats are increasing. We've talked about measures that business leaders can take. We've also covered, the evolving cyber threat landscape, as it were. As we draw this podcast to a close, I can't believe we're coming to the end of it. We just started, it seems. But anyway, as we draw this podcast to a close, what would you say should be the key takeaway for business leaders?
Yeah, multiple key takeaways. I've got to me, the main takeaway is adapt a security first culture, and always be thinking about security there. It's not necessarily the shiny new widget there you've got in the software department that's going to protect you. It's everybody doing their little bit to make the organization secure. But once you've got that in place, then start with the basics. Make sure that you're managing your assets. Make sure that you've got real-time visibility of all those assets. You understand what they're doing every day, every hour of the week, and make sure you're able to manage that. So, being able to discover what you own, being able to patch, make sure they're compliant, make sure they're being inventoried, and make sure that they're doing the job they're meant to be doing. Computers are great things. They make our life a lot easier. If we secure and manage them correctly, then, they won't work against us and make our life harder.
Indeed. Chris, thank you so much. All sounds like great advice. Thank you so much for joining us today to help navigate this seemingly complicated course and doing it so effortlessly. Thank you so much.
Yemi, it's been an absolute pleasure to join you, and thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
That brings this week's episode of the Tech for Business Leaders podcast with Mazars to a close. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe to the series and leave a review to extend our reach and keep technology at the heart of the business community. We look forward to sharing more with you in our next episode, but for now, take care and thank you for listening.